So we're continuing in today, and today we find ourselves in Maseches Demai, Perek Gimel, Mishna Vav, and Mishna Dalid, Perek Dalid, Mishna Aleph, Chapter 3, Mishna 6, and Chapter 4, Mishna 1. So Chapter 3, Mishna 6, Perek Gimel, Mishna Vav says as follows. Hanosi lechamoso. So remember again, continuing on the cases that we've seen so far, where halacha lamais, we're trying to figure out what is the status if a person goes ahead and gives, let's say, wheat to someone for preparation purposes. Can they assume that what they gave is what they are getting in return? So an interesting case. A person gives his mother-in-law, who is an Amma Aretz, food to cook for him. What's the halacha? Ma'asr shu nosin lo. He has to tithe what he gives her, because remember again, now that I give an Amma Aretz something that is untithed, Vashu notin, but you also have to retithe anything that she gives back to you. Now this is interesting. Why is that? So this is what's interesting. Because it's your mother-in-law, and because it's someone who's related to you, the assumption is that if she messes up the food that she's preparing, she'll replace the food that she ruined with her own food. And therefore, halacha lemaisa, because she's an Amma Aretz, you have to be concerned that what she is replacing it with is untithed. So the Gemara says, why is this? Now, even though we learned before in Mishnah Dalid that halacha lemaisa in Amma Aretz doesn't normally exchange food that's given to them, this case is different. Rabbi Yehuda says, why? Because number one, this is a mother-in-law, and therefore she wants her daughter to have food. So if she messes up the food that her son-in-law gave her, she's going to go ahead and replace it. And number two, she's embarrassed in front of her son-in-law. She doesn't want to have to tell her son-in-law that she ruined the food. And therefore, again, even though an Amma Aretz doesn't normally exchange food that is given to him, in this situation there is a concern that a mother-in-law would do so. Mod Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the Bartanura points out the Rabbanan, on the other hand, disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. And they say that halacha lemaisa, a mother-in-law is treated like any other Amma Aretz, and therefore the assumption is that whatever she's given is what she is going to return. Now, Mod Rabbi Yehuda will agree with the Rabbanon, benosi in lechamoso shvius, shena chashuda lahachlif lahachil as bita shvius. So this is interesting. The one case where Rabbi Yehuda will agree is when it comes to Shemitah produce. That as much as there's a concern that perhaps a mother-in-law will substitute her own untithed food for the food of her son-in-law that was ruined, when it comes to Shemitah, even Amei Haaretz, even ignorant individuals are careful with Shemitah produce, and therefore we are not concerned that halacha lemaisa, she may come to substitute, we'll call it Shemitah-friendly produce given to her by her son-in-law with produce that has an Isser Shemitah on it. Incredible. That concludes Perek Gimel. We now find Mazel Tov, Mishnah, Perek Daled, Mishnah Aleph, Chapter 4, the first Mishnah. Halokeach Peiros Mimi Sheino Ne'aman Ala Maisrus. V'shachach la'asron. This is an interesting case. Saloch la'maisa, following situation. Let's say a person purchased fruit from someone who's not trusted regarding Meiser. An Amma Aretz. I purchased fruit from an Amma Aretz. V'shachach la'asron. Now what happens? Now it's Shabbos, and I forgot to tithe the produce before Shabbos. Now remember again, one is not permitted to go ahead and tithe produce on Shabbos. It's tikkun mana, it has the appearance of fixing something, may also have related issues that it looks like engaging in commerce. So therefore one is not permitted to do this. So now, but it's Shabbos, and I need the produce. What's the halacha? Sholo b'Shabbos yochal alpiv. So if I could ask the Amma Aretz, the seller, did you tithe it? And the Amma Aretz says yes, I could rely on his yes and eat the produce on Shabbos. However, chash chamatz Shabbos lo yochal achi aser. This heter is only to allow you. In other words, normally the whole idea of Demai is that an Amma Aretz is not believed to say that he tithed. In this situation, we'll rely on the Amma Aretz because we have no choice, because it's Shabbos. But that only allows you consumption on Shabbos. Once Shabbos is over, one is obligated to tithe the produce. So once it gets dark on Motzei Shabbos, lo yochal ad sheyeh aser. You can't go ahead and eat the produce until you go ahead and tithe the produce. Lo matzo. Now, what happens if halacha lemaisa, a person did not go ahead and find the Amma Aretz, the seller, and therefore again he wasn't able to ask him, did you take Trumas Meistrus or not, or Meister at least? Amarlo achar shenu ne'eman ala Meistrus me'usarein. So let's say again you can't find the seller, but let's say you find someone else who says, this seller, I know that he separates out Meiser So the halacha is you could rely on his testimony. Ochel al piv, chashcha Motzi Shabbos lo yochal ad she'asra. But on Motzi Shabbos, you can't go ahead and eat from any of it until you go ahead and tithe the produce. So what you begin to see over here is something very interesting, which is that halacha l'maisa, even though normally we're not going to believe what an Amma Aretz says, and certainly not what an unrelated Amma Aretz says, for Shabbos, if someone tells you that the produce is tithed, halacha l'maisa, that will allow Shabbos consumption, but on Motzei Shabbos, one will have to go ahead and tithe. Trumas meiser shel Demai shechazon koma. So here's an interesting situation. I buy produce from an Amma Aretz, so it's Demai, and I separated out Trumas meiser, which remember again, meiser goes to the Levi. Trumas meiser is the portion from the Levi's portion that has to be given to the Kohen. I separated it out, but it fell back into the mixture. Now, when it falls back into the mixture, it creates a mixture that is called Demai. What's the halacha? Omer, this is interesting. Now, in this situation, what ends up happening over here is that halacha l'maisa, now demai, right? Well, once you have this mixture, meduma, once you have this mixture, so that creates a problem. So in this situation, Rabbi Shimon says something very interesting. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri says, in this kind of situation, you can go back to the seller and you can ask him, tell me, did you separate out Shumas and Maisrus? And if he says that he did, then you could rely on his word. So what you begin to see over here is as follows. The whole concept of Demai is a rabbinic stringency. And therefore, again, when that stringency causes either undue difficulty or potential loss, essentially the rabbis dispensed with the stringency. So if it's Shabbos, and this is the produce that I have, I could rely on asking the seller, did you go ahead and take Trumas Meiser? And if he says yes, I could rely on that. If, let's say, I separated out Trumas Meiser, but it gets mixed back in with the chulin, with the unconsecrated part, and I run the risk now of losing everything, then halacha l'maisa, I could go back to the seller, I could ask him, tell me, did you go ahead and separate out Shumas and Maisres? And if he said he did, then I could rely on him. So we are permitted to dispense with the chumrah of Demai when it creates either a hardship or potential for total loss. All right, we'll stop over here. Shkayach everyone, a good tavach.